Greetings and welcome everybody to another exciting episode of Brony Spotlight. We got another interview this week with a very special guest, Dr. Psychology of the Brony Study. Personally, I'm not very certain how to explain this, so I'll let the person himself explain it, I guess.
Yes, it's my non-pony name would be Dr. Pat Edwards. I'm a adjunct professor at USC Upstate in South Carolina. For those who haven't heard, just a real quick synopsis of the history of the Brony Study is about a little over 3 years ago, my then 16-year-old son told me that he was a Brony, and I had the reaction most people have is like, a what? You've got to be kidding me. But then he directed me to go on the internet. I went on and I was quite surprised and intrigued with the fandom, the level of creativity, the artwork, the videos, and I was also struck by the very kind of positive love and tolerance, pro-social message. And so then I talked to a colleague, Dr. Redden, and we basically started the Brony Study. And we decided we needed to do a survey. And in part, we were struck by the stereotypes that we were hearing, you know, the negativity, the haters, the Fox News people. And we decided, you know, we needed to do a survey and first look to see if those stereotypes, in fact, were true, you know. And although I had partly because of my son, and, you know, the Eagle Scout, wonderfully positive young man, that I really felt like he wouldn't be involved with something if it was at all negative. So I interviewed 4 Bronies, kind of in depth, and from there was able to put together a survey. I also then watched My Little Pony. I didn't watch it at first because I wanted to kind of hear from the Bronies before I drew any of my own conclusions. And then I watched a number of the episodes and was quite surprised to see the parable quality. You know, I didn't realize every episode was like a little parable.
Yeah.
And then we ran the first survey, and colleagues said, you'll never get anybody to do it. And in a matter of a couple weeks, we had close to 5,000 Bronies, which is an almost unheard of level of you know, in doing research, typically one of the hardest things is finding subjects.
Well, with a fandom group like this, you don't have a lot of people who want to research them in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
So by giving the opportunity, of course, you'd get at least some results.
Right. And I think in particular, you know, we got that response, which was a very good response. And then I call it the first BronyCon. Technically, it may not have been, but it was the January 7th, I think it was, in New York City, and there were about 800 Bronies there. It's the one that the Brony Tale, the movie that's
right,
out now.
That was the second one, actually.
Right. That's my understanding is it was the first for me. But and we were there, and I presented, you know, our initial results and got just an incredible response. And after that, in Equestria Daily ran a little piece saying, come on, Bronies, this is science, these guys are... And I think the perception was then that we weren't trying to make the fandom look deviant, that we really were truly doing science. And so our second survey got 12,000 subjects within a week. And since then, you know, the Bronies have just really ponied up every time and helped out with our surveys, and we've been to 4 BronyCons now, and so, you know, it's I'm very much enjoying it. We had 1,000 people at our panel up at BronyCon.
Right, you just said you finally realized you're horse famous after 3 years.
Yeah, I guess.
At least around here, people always are talking about Dr. Psychology, how he's so close, no one can ever touch him.
Yeah. Well, I think sometimes you particularly in this kind of situation, somebody gets involved and yet you don't realize that, you know, they're going to be close to someone. There's going to be some Brony.
Right.
And of course, if it wasn't for my son Will, in all honesty, I don't know that I would have ever discovered the Bronies, So Will reminds me at times that, I kind of owe him for my pony famousness now.
Horse fame, not
Horse
pony
fame.
fame.
Okay.
I don't know why. That's just what it is.
Horse fame. Okay. I'm still learning the terminology.
Yeah, there's like 4 terms is how I've counted it, and most of them don't really matter. So,
Yeah. Okay.
All right. Well, I don't want this to be a boring interview where I ask you a bunch of questions that you've already been asked. So I guess I should ask the question of, are there any questions that you get asked a lot of times that you might want to be cleared up in this interview before I accidentally ask them myself, I guess?
Well, yeah.
Well, I mean, there's the obvious 2 I'm required to ask,
Yeah,
like
go
best
ahead.
pony and
Okay.
do you
Yep.
ship?
Yeah. I'm not sure exactly what you mean by the ship, do we?
Shipping, that's when you take 2 characters and you assume they have a relationship with each other.
Okay. No, I guess I don't do that. I mean, my involvement with is very much more from the science standpoint. So I'm studying the herd, but I'm not immersed in the fandom.
Right.
That's why some of the terminology and those things. I do have a favorite pony, though, and this was kind of an interesting issue for a while. The Bronies would always ask, well, who's your favorite pony? And I would always say, well, listen, I'm not a Brony. I'm a Brony booster. But then I finally realized, well, I need to choose a favorite pony.
The safest answer is always Rainbow Dash. She's considered the envoy, I guess.
Yeah. Well, but actually, I decided it had to be Twilight Sparkle. And the reason is she was a student pony. Now, I've had a couple people say, well, came back and said, well, now that she's an Alicorn, is she still your favorite pony? And I'm like, well, I just view her as a graduate student now. And that.
Right. Very few people agree with that the lessons in friendship are basically a doctoral thesis.
Mm-hmm.
That says a lot. That says a lot about Equestria there when you can get a doctorate in that.
But so but I enjoy I enjoy watching the show, and I enjoy the characters. I enjoy the humor and that. So I enjoy all the ponies and that. So.
All right, so back to the question before the questions. Are there any things that you're just asked constantly besides, best pony, like you just answered there?
Well, most of the time, and I actually did it when I did the little intro, is the question of how did this come to be? Because
right.
Even from colleagues, and one of the things that have been interesting, both Marcia and I have been a little surprised. I mean, we know the Bronies have to deal with stereotyping and they have to deal with negativity. And I guess we both thought that when we started studying this, that our colleagues, other psychologists, would immediately say, oh, that's fascinating. There's a lot we could learn about group formation, about stereotypes, about how people overcome negative stereotypes, about identity, just lots of potential things we could discover. And yet, by and large, our colleagues kind of shake their head and say, that's stupid. It's like they are blinded by the stereotypes to the degree. And I think, in fact, in general, psychology and the social sciences have for a long time, I think of it this way, they have fallen under this kind of umbrella get a life idea. That anybody who's into any fandom, and if they're an avid fan, if they paint themselves orange on Saturdays for the Clemson games, or if they, put a number on the side of their car because they like NASCAR, that they just need to get a life.
Yeah, fandom isn't usually very studied, actively studied. It's
no,
kind of odd.
no. In fact, see, I was quite shocked because the first step in doing any research is first you discover a question and then you look at the literature.
Right.
And when I did, there was like nothing in psychology proper. I eventually discovered, and thank God for Google Scholar, I was able to mine some obscure Australian journals and places where I was able to find a few things about fandoms. But that's also part of what really excites me about what we're doing with the Bronies is that I predict in 10, 15 years there will probably be an area, and it'll be accepted, and it may even have its own journal, within psychology proper that will be looking at fandoms, in part because the bronies are showing us that, this get a life idea, well, no, the fandoms can be so much more than that. I mean, they can be...
Fandoms can actually be giving you a life. That's what I get a lot.
Right. And they can, and also they can be incredibly pro-social. And, we're at a time, a lot of people would say, where the social institutions that used to bring us together and hold us together and give us guidance, churches and education even, is fraying. And there are a lot of people who don't go to those anymore, or they don't find that they have an answer. And the internet has so pervades people's lives. My generation, they don't get it. They don't realize how connected and pervasive it is. But because of that, there's a tremendous potential for the internet to provide groups, worldwide communities that can do things that some people, whether it be friendship, whether it be a safe place to share and explore, or a place where it's okay to be a grown man and wear a shirt with colorful ponies on it, And we need that. I predict we need more groups like that. And I think the bronies could ultimately be a model for how, because there are things that I've learned in the last month that the bronies are doing that other fandoms are beginning to mimic, that are very important ways of trying to sort of build boundaries around the group to at least keep a handle on things like the Rule 34 material.
Right.
You don't want 10-year-old kids who join the fandom to search for Pinkie Pie and end up getting porn. You want that stuff's going to be there, and it's understandable that people will look at it, but you need to try to figure out how to put somewhat of a boundary around it so parents can feel comfortable. And in fact, just the other day, I forget what I was looking for, an image to use on our presentation at BronyCon, and I forget what. I just kind of simply Googled something about pony images, and sure enough, in the couple pages there were some very explicit sexual images.
By page 2, if you search Big Mac, you're going to find something.
Yeah. But if you do it with some of the control devices, there are bronies out there who are seeking the images and labeling them and flagging them. So parents, as long as they keep their kids searching through those devices, they're going to be safe. But the point is I think I would hope in 20, 30 years there will be groups through the internet that are going to do the kind of things that
self-policing and such.
Right. And providing a safe environment and providing a place where people can come and feel comfortable and share joy and that. And I see the bronies and the fandom doing that. So.
Right. So really, most people just want to know how it started and stuff like
That's
that.
That's one of the question about favorite, who's our favorite pony. One thing we also get, and I mentioned this at BronyCon because I wanted to clarify something. Someone was overheard saying something to the effect of, because with all those people at our panel, it's like, boy, they must pay them a lot to come here. And
No,
I kind of
they
pointed
don't.
out that, in fact, this came up at one point. Someone wrote a letter in the local paper. Marcia put a letter in there about the incident that happened up in North Carolina where the young boy was told not to bring his Rainbow Dash backpack because it was causing bullying.
Support for Grayson.
Yeah, and she wrote a letter to the local paper. Well, somebody wrote back, and they just were indignant about the Brony study and, another example of the waste of money in higher education. And we made it very clear that we get no support. There's nobody giving us money. It's coming totally out of our own pockets, So, not that, it'd be nice if there was grant money or that, but we simply haven't found any. And it's not like we're spending, huge sums of money. Basically, we cover the cost for SurveyMonkey for the website, and when we go to the conventions, we pay for it. But otherwise, we're doing this as scientists, and I think we're also doing it as a way to thank the Bronies, because, again, they have been so supportive of our research.
Right. No one wants to be classified as something they're not.
Right. And I think, I've said this before, and I think that when they write the history of the Bronies, somewhere down the road, I suspect the Brony study is going to play, at least hopefully be recognized for one thing I think that we did, is that because we moved so quickly, that BronyCon, that January BronyCon in New York City, I mean, the fandom hadn't been probably but a little over a year old, and yet we were presenting our first data, and it so spoke against all the stereotypes. And we were able to get that out there. And I've had a number of Bronies come up and say how, their parents or other people would make derogatory comment, and they would send them to our website. And our website began to become this place that people would go to, and they were using it to dispel some of those myths. And when I talk to some other fandoms, what they often say happens is a lot of times you get a negative stereotype that goes against you, and you have no way to counteract it, and that ends up sticking. And so then you're always in a hole. Whereas I think the Bronies, look at Fox News, went from saying horrendous, horrible things about the Bronies that were so untrue to now, I don't think they really talk about it. Or even on Fox, their website, they had a fairly positive
Fox
article.
Baltimore last year actually did a report on the cosplay contest. It was kind of weird. There was nothing bad about it, but it was just...
Well, they're still going to point to the oddity, but what seems to have happened is some of those just out of the blue, off the wall attacks have stopped, because, and the Bronies know this, they tell people, go look at, they've got 50,000 Bronies, see what they have to say. And it quiets that negativity. And I think that has allowed the fandom to create this. You've got 2 documentaries now that...
Actually, there's a lot more.
Well, there's more, but there's the 2 major ones.
The big ones, that, yeah.
And not just major because I'm in them, but they've gotten distributed outside of just sort of like on the internet and that. But I think that the fandom has built a persona that is very positive, and that helps protect it. So it makes it a little easier to grow, because you're not constantly fighting it's just a bunch of gays, it's just a bunch of perverts, it's a bunch of 30-year-olds who live at home in their parents' basement. It's not that. Look at...
even Trek still has stuff like that happening to them, and Trek is 50 years old in a month.
Right, yeah. So, you're always going to have some of that. I have somebody that I know who's big into anime, has had, still kind of does, but had a very negative impression of the Bronies. But it was based mostly on, I think, a handful of Bronies she met in some anime context, and she said, they were a bunch of AHs. And it's like, but that's not representative of the whole fandom. She probably got a few kind of older hipster Bronies who are pissed because the fandom has changed.
Right.
And,
a lot of fandom groups think of Bronies as being posers because their show is new. They don't have a lot of backlog.
Right. She claims that a lot of the anime people say that part of the problem with Bronies, although I don't see it as a problem, is that for many of them, this is the first fandom they've ever really been involved with, to the point of going to conventions and creating the artwork.
Right.
But I don't see anything. But so what?
Well, why would you go to a convention for a fandom you didn't care for?
I think what they're almost saying is they're newbies at fandoms. But I'm like, no. If you join a fandom and immerse yourself in it, isn't that what fandoms? Why do you have to oh great, I need 2 more fandoms and then I could get really serious? It's like, that doesn't make sense. So I think, to be honest with you, I think sometimes Other fandoms want to feel a little superior. They want to say, you know, well, they haven't been around long enough. They haven't.
Right. Well, I mean, there's no point in arguing stuff like that, though, really.
No.
But
Those are opinions, and you know, let them hold those opinions if they want to. And
right.
Brony on.
I guess.
So I'm trying to think of other. You know, I think it's interesting. One question we got quite often, and we answered it at the panel discussion we did at BronyCon, is that although we had to do it in a limited way, which afterwards quite a few people came up, and of course invariably they have questions that good research, you ask a question and it generates more questions, and that tells you it's a good, is we looked at that issue of what does your favorite pony say about you?
Right.
And our hypothesis was, and I drew this after having talked to a lot of people, was that favorite pony says a lot about identity, in that about 70% of, and we asked people to choose their favorite of the main six. We didn't, and that was one of the points people said, well, my favorite pony's Luna, or but we had to limit it, because if we left it open to every pony, we would have
I'll have a lot of people picking Tom.
yeah, and the problem would be is, you know, the key to the research is you need to have a mass. So if I've got 3,000 bronies and they have to choose one of the main six, then I have 3,000 data points I can work with. But what we found was for about 70% of the bronies, they in fact chose favorite pony because they identified with them, which is probably why Twilight Sparkle and Fluttershy ended up being the two top picked ponies. However, about 20% of the bronies said they choose the favorite pony based upon how they'd like to be. And interestingly, in that group, the three choices that those people most like were Rainbow Dash, Pinkie Pie, and Applejack. It's sort of like, if you could choose to be, who wouldn't want to be number one? Hardworking and dedicated, and a party pony.
Oh man, Rarity gets no love in this study, does she?
It's yeah. Rarity ends up, and I'm not sure exactly. A
lot of people hate her because, I mean, in most cartoons she'd be a villain. You know that, right?
Yeah, she is also probably.
It's really hard to relate to someone like that.
She would be, from a stereotype standpoint, the most stereotypically feminine of, you know, the fashion pony, the drama, those kind of issues. And given that the majority of the fandom is still male,
right?
Fluttershy, well, a lot of people are shy, you know.
Yeah.
And so that's not necessarily associated with just female, but a lot, I think, Rarity's characteristics are a bit, you know, more. But and the other thing we found was when we looked at people's personality, we found that not only was it that they identified, but their actual personalities, people who are more extroverted tended to like Pinkie Pie and Rainbow Dash, the more introverted like Twilight Sparkle and Fluttershy.
Right.
And people who tended to be sort of like really open to lots of new experiences, and also low in conscientiousness, in other words, rules. What are rules? You know, very much drawn to Pinkie Pie. You know, so what we tended to find is that personality, an individual's personality, seemed to in fact be tied to their favorite pony choice. So and which I in our discussion said, you know, one thing I'd like people to think about is these who's the best pony arguments. It's like, oh, you know, stop it. Because it's sort of, in other words, you're
leftover from older times.
Right, because it's sort of like arguing with somebody who's extroverted and telling them that the extroverted character is not. And of course they're going to choose that, the same way the introvert's going to. So, you know, you might discuss which is the best pony within a certain context. You know, like if you were faced with a certain dilemma, who would you rather have helping you? But this who's the best pony, I think I think just a waste of time.
Right.
But then if you got a lot of time on your hands, I guess you could.
It's kind of neat to know, what your well, it's like you said with the grouping people, you can usually figure out the kind of person based on who they pick.
But then it's interesting because immediately after we said that we did that, we had afterwards people came up and one guy came up and he was very nice about it, but he said, "Oh, I don't fit. And I said, "Well, what do you mean?" And he said, "Well, I'm very extroverted and I'm very much all about rarity, And I said, "Well, the thing about," and I had actually mentioned this at the beginning of our talk, is that when you do the kind of research we're doing, which
you're not going to get everyone to fit.
Well, we're doing nomothetic research,
right.
So we're looking at big groups of people, and you're always going to have unique
outliers,
exceptions. And in fact, every person, if I sat down with every brony and spent 2 to 3 hours, I'd find that each of them is unique in their own way. Why they choose, why they watch, how they react to other people. But when you do research, it's nomothetic. So in other words, I want to understand 3,000 bronies and their choices. So it doesn't always make, I kind of tell people to be careful because it won't necessarily speak to you as an individual, but it does speak to the whole fandom. So when we talk about the fandom being a positive place, proactive place, how it's changed people, I could find lots of individual bronies to tell me their stories, and there are some wonderful stories. Our interest is, are they just a few scattered outliers, or is this the whole? And in fact, what we're finding is the whole group.
That's science.
Yeah, and so we can talk about the fandom, and there will be individual ponies within it who may fit and may not.
Have you been thinking about doing others? I said that bad.
Yeah.
Have you been thinking about doing any other studies, like the best pony? Like, I don't know, what does your OC have to say about you, like picking the races or whatever?
Well, after this presentation and a lot of the questions we got, I think one of the things we're going to ponder is about doing a survey in which we expand on that and maybe go into, and somebody says that have people choose their main 6, but then have them choose their favorite secondary pony, or which among the queens and princesses,
antagonists,
and go in and begin to kind of pull some of that out, because clearly the bronies have some real interest in it, and so we're thinking about that.
Well, I'll give you one thing: don't put Tom in any of the choices. Everyone's going to pick Tom, and your dad is going to be screwed out.
I know that's a. Well, or if you put Tom in there, you make sure you put him in a way that, you can collect the data in groupings. So sometimes you'll have one grouping, and it's almost like you're like, okay, let's throw those few odds and ends in that grouping. So we'll have it, but it's not going to necessarily contaminate or complicate the other, groups of data. Although you could also, in some ways, because who is Tom? Is he the...
Tom is the boulder from...
with, what's her name?
With the Discord episode with Rarity. Tom's the boulder.
Oh, okay, that's right.
You could do Best Rock, actually, because there's a Rocky in Party of One and a Boulder with Maud, but, I mean, that's a silly question.
From a research standpoint, though, it's interesting. You could, and
Right.
This is the fun thing about research is you just you sort of generate what ifs. But that question about Tom is almost a question you could use as a screening question, because sometimes and people will say this. Well, are you sure everybody was really serious about this? Is everybody approaching it in a serious? I mean, if we're talking about the ponies and you're choosing a rock, well, what does that say? I mean, maybe you're so oppositional and you're so you're so hipster-ish in a sense.
Or you don't understand the question.
You either don't understand it, or you're trying to purposefully play with us, screw with us. And if that's the case, then one thing you can do is you can say anybody who chose that option, we're going to pull them out and set them aside. And we're going to use that as kind of a screen. Now, let me mention one thing, LeBron. You never throw away data.
Right.
You know, we tend to get some data that comes in from people that we technically can't use right away, like some of the really younger people. But I never throw the data away. You know, if somebody's taken the time to give it to us, we have it. You know, we keep it. And because sometimes what happens is later questions, you think of really good questions, you know, long after you've collected the surveys. And I tend to believe in some, if you've taken our surveys, you've experienced this. We do not believe in brief surveys.
Yeah, you had better keep our data, because those surveys take an hour.
Oh, how I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but this video has reached its time limit. How unfortunate that it just cut out like that. Someone should fire the audio producer. Wait, I am the audio producer! This is the twist of a lifetime. Tune in to part 2 of this dramatic and epic saga by clicking the annotation that I dictate to be at the top right of the screen. Goodbye.